The lights burned hot as the demo clock hit 0, and my chest thudded like a drum. Maya Bennett said, "We ship truth, not theater." The screen flickered, then a torrent of stolen files poured across the feed. Reporters hissed questions like bees. Victor Hargrove smiled from a rival booth, and my throat cooled with dread. Luke Harris stared at me, frozen as if his cord had been pulled. Jenna Park whispered, "Breathe. We can tryage." Priya Petal's fingers danced on a laptop. Ceiling doors I did not know were open. Noah Green said, "Full disclosure, an hour later at twice the cost." I lifted the mic and felt the room tilt. I said, "You will hear everything from me." The alerts struck in a jagged rhythm that made my spine hum like wire. Maya Bennett said, "Freeze every non-essential expense now." Daniel Bennett said, "This is how careers end, not how legends begin." Bank emails stacked like bricks, and the road ahead narrowed into a pinhole. Victor Hargrove stepped onto a business show and polished his halo. Victor said, "Integrity is our advantage." I tasted iron and remembered the months of sleeping on the office floor. Jenna Park said, "We triage cash, then comms." Noah Green said, "We disclose before rumor writes our story." I nodded, because the alternative was surrender. The office felt wider now that panic lived in every corner. Maya Bennett said, "If you want out, I will write your recommendations tonight." Chairs squeaked as people avoided my eyes. Jenna Park said, "We're not leaving, we're anchoring." Priya Patel closed ports and stitched logs like a surgeon. Noah Green said, "Own the mistake, even if it is not yours." The hum of servers steadied the air. I pressed my palm to the glass and watched the rain choose its paths. I said, "We build a clean ledger of truth, and we start now." We circled the conference table like ships in fog. Noah Green said, "Full audit, immediate disclosure, no half steps." Daniel Bennett said, "Shut it down before it bleeds you dry." My pulse thudded against his fear and found its own shape. Jenna Park said, "We can stand a storm if the hull is honest." I stared at the logo we had carved from Ramen Nights. I said, "We do not hide." Noah nodded and slid a checklist that weighed more than paper. The room exhaled, and a path sharpened in the noise. The elevator doors parted to a studio that smelled of graphite and old victories. Evelyn Shaw said, "You can quit, or you can author yourself." Her eyes held storms and harbors. I laid the facts on the desk like cards. Evelyn said, "Decide the ending before the middle drowns you." I remembered Luke's easy laugh and felt the splinter it hid. I said, "I choose origin." Evelyn tapped a fountain pen against a blank page. Evelyn said, "Then write the rules you refuse to break." My breath steadied as the first line formed. The garage smelled like rain, solder, and borrowed time, and the breaker clicked twice. Maya Bennett said, "If one truck finds one shop faster, a week changes for someone small." Luke Harris tapped the breadboard like it owed him a song and grinned. Luke said, "Investors want velocity, not hymns, so make it sprint." A fuse popped, and the prototype jittered, then stilled like a held breath. I traced routes on a scarred whiteboard and felt fear behave like fuel. Luke said, "We can ship a shiny demo and buy runway with polish." I said, "We ship truth and buy runway with proof." The rain drummed, and the room answered with patient beeps. We shook hands across a wobbly table and called it a vow. The diner lights made every problem look printable, and hope came by the mug. Jenna Park boxed a grid onto a napkin and steadied my hands with her calm. Jenna said, "Small merchants first, always, or the story cheats." I watched neon ripple on chrome and heard my pulse slow. I said, "Access should not be a privilege, even when profit is loud." She underlined the sentence until the paper thinned and smiled. The waitress topped coffee and nodded like she heard a prayer. I said, "If we drift, this brings us home and cuts noise." Jenna said, "Then we measure by this, not applause graphs." The napkin felt like a compass more honest than any slide. The VC floor smelled like glass and certainty, and I carried neither with me. Marcus Allen scanned our deck as if it were a map, with missing roads and warnings. Marcus said, funding follows compliance that survives daylight and subpoenas. The word daylight cut cleaner than fear, and made room. I said, we audit ourselves and publish pulse, even when it slows. He tapped a metronome on the table and drew firm lines on terms. Jenna Park said, we can ship guardrails and features without theater. Marcus said, governance tightens or capital stays home. I saw the horizon move but not recede, and I nodded. We left lighter because the truth had chosen its weight. On the roof, the wind filed opinions against our faces and did not apologize. Luke Harris paced a small circle and counted phantom users as if they might appear. Luke said, sell now, take a win, and keep the team fed without a miracle. I watched the streetlights blur and chose a steadier breath. I said, we are not for sale to fear, even when fear pays cash. He kicked the yellow line and stared at exits like they were friends. Luke said, you cannot feed a crew on ideals, not this month. I said, shortcuts starve missions and grow regrets with interest. Silence pressed and held us like glass. We walked down different stairs because answers had split. Evelyn Shaw's studio kept the kind of quiet that edits vanity and leaves bone. She listened without moving the air and let my storm spend itself. Evelyn Shaw said, write the sentence that survives scandal and success, or drift. My hand shook, then found rhythm over a blank card that waited. I wrote the line from the diner and felt it stand up in ink. Evelyn read it twice and chose a small nod that felt like tide. Evelyn said, now weld every choice to this, even the hard, cheap ones. I said, if I forget, I measure, and I cut back to this. She slid the card to me like a tool, not a trophy. The room seemed taller because the future had a spine. The inbox choked on polite exits that smelled like smoke after rain. Maya Bennett, said client, a deferred client B needs escape hatches now. A subject line from Victor Hargrove flashed like bait. Victor said, we can shelter your customers today, at scale. The team read in a silence that knew the price of shortcuts. Jenna Park said, predatory discounts cost more than they promise. Priya Patel said, their migrator fingerprints our stack and our cadence. My pulse slowed enough to hear the floor hum. Noah Green said, archive every approach and loop counsel on each. Daniel Bennett hovered and swallowed words he could not shape. I said, we hold the line and re-earn every renewal. The room tightened and found breath again. Night stretched like taffy and clung to the lungs. I counted ceiling tiles until the room bent. Maya Bennett said, breathe in 4, hold 4, release 8. The storm outside wrote gray music on the glass. Jenna Park arrived with 2 mugs and a spine of calm. Jenna said, win this minute, then the next, and let hours collect. Thunder rolled and found a plate in the wall. I said, what if the mission is larger than my stamina? She set a mug like an anchor on a drifting deck. Jenna said, borrow mine until yours returns. My ribs loosened enough to let hope in. The storm stayed, but it learned our names. By noon the vendor calls drummed like shoes on hollow stairs. The courier demanded prepay and left a paper echo. Marcus Allen said, wire paused until review clears. The word paused scraped like sand on enamel. I said, we publish a runway plan and trim burn, not soul. Noah Green said, timestamp promises and stack receipts by risk. Jenna Park color-coded invoices into a triage wall. Priya Patel said, refactor billing, sync and crush gateway fees. The math hurt, then began to sing in even measures. Marcus said, show cash truth, not comfort. I nodded and cut until the numbers stood. The bridge was narrow, and we stepped anyway. Luke Harris waited by the freight elevator, where echoes grow teeth. Luke said, sell to Victor and save what can be saved. The metal doors kept our faces like cold witnesses. I said, we are not a trophy for his shelf. He paced a coin of floor and kicked the yellow line. Luke said, you gamble with rent when you chase purity. Heat rose, then cooled into a bar of steel. I said, selling the spine buys relief and invoices regret. He glanced at the exit as if gravity bent there. Luke said, I will not drown for a hymn. He walked, and the air lost half its noise. The war room turned from panic to practice. Noah Green said transparency memo by midnight, facts only. Priya Patel rolled out forensic logging with a surgeon's patience. Jenna Park said single voice for comms, one dashboard for truth. I said, our moat is clarity and our map is time. The whiteboard filled with times that could not lie. Evelyn Shaw texted, armor is not steel, it is clean lines. Daniel Bennett hovered and stopped flinching. We pressed publish and let the silence test our nerve. The building felt heavier and safer at once. I said, this is how we stand when the wind returns. The room agreed without sound. The logs blinked like stars that refused to form a map. Priya Patel said, these access spikes are from a credential we trust. My gut cooled as the trace drew a thin red river. Jenna Park said, could it be a ghost process? Priya said, it is a person with admin and insomnia. The timestamps kissed, nights Luke Harris loved to pace. I said confirm without guessing. Priya zoomed and layered ips like panes of glass. She said, same device rotating networks, same keystroke rhythm. The room shrank to the size of a cursor. I whispered a name. I did not want to be right. Noah Green arrived with coffee and a scalpel made of law. Noah Green said, we correlate devices, then we let the facts speak. He laid audit lines beside phone pings, and the page went silent. Jenna Park said, say it out loud. Noah said the leak originates from Luke's hardware. My throat found no air to waste. I said we notify counsel, then we confront. Noah nodded and marked a sober box. He said, we preserve, we refrain from blame words, we state events. The truth felt cold and clean. It also felt like falling through a floor. We met Luke Harris in a quiet lobby that smelled like marble and endings. Luke Harris said, I did what you never would. The echo felt rehearsed. I said, you accessed the repo at 3 a.m. and at 4:12 a.m. He looked at the fountain like it might confess for him. Luke said, I kept us alive while you wrote hymns. My hands stayed at my sides because rage wants volume. I said, you sold trust to rent relief. His jaw set like a lock. He said, you will thank me when the check clears. I said, there will be no check. The evidence sat in his phone like a grin. Luke Harris said, a bridge, not betrayal. Screenshots showed a roadmap folder and a calendar invite with Victor's logo. I said, you named the bridge after our marrow. He flinched and looked for exits only he could see. Luke said, their deal moves the team and preserves equity. I said, it buys your title and burns our oath. Silence pressed like glass against a flame. My voice found a steadier ground. I said, you will return assets and revoke access now. He did not move. The future did. Back at the office, the air tasted like metal and resolve. Noah Green said, we send notice and we state remedies. He typed with a tempo that promised daylight. Evelyn Shaw joined on speaker and brought the room a spine. Evelyn Shaw said, choose the hill and plant your flag clean. I said, we refuse hush money and we publish a summary of facts. Jenna Park said, we route all press to one page. Priya Patel rotated keys and watched doors close. I signed our name to the notice. The silence afterward felt like weather changing. From midnight to dawn, the clean room felt like a chapel lit by monitors. Priya Patel said, no previous code, no tainted notes, cite every decision. Jenna Park said, 6-hour sprints, commits named like oaths. I deleted modules I once defended like heirlooms and felt lighter. Maya Bennett said, "Cues must obey reality, not hope." Priya Patel said, "Event mesh rerouted, idempotent, retried with backoff." Noah Green said, "Right, why not just what? Because courts read intent." Marcus Allen pinged, "Show measurable deltas every sunrise." I said, "Telemetry will breathe or we roll it back." Logs grew steady tides, tests turned red then green, and quiet courage took root. Morning carved sharp edges into the deck. Jenna Park said, "Tell it from behind a counter, not from a cloud." I sketched a corner shop, racing a storm with our rails. Maya Bennett said, "Sub 10-minute packing, curb pickup, no idle." Priya Patel said, "Edge caches warm, cold starts under a blink." I cut buzzwords that never earned rent. Noah Green said, "Promises must fit paper and audit." Jenna Park said, "Name the human win before the metric." Marcus Allen said, "This reads CFO and clerk at once." I said, "We sell time back to small hands and call it dignity." The deck clicked like a metronome, finally in key. Turns arrived like instruments for a surgery. We meant to survive. Marcus Allen said, "Audit committee, dual control keys, independent SOC roadmap. I let the weight land and nodded. Maya Bennett said, "Oversight is welcome. Mission control remains here." Noah Green said, "Quarterly transparency reports with breach drill proofs." Jenna Park said, "Security drills scheduled, not summoned by panic." Marcus Allen said, "Refresh options, add a fair pool for hires." I added merchant data ownership and portability. He tapped the page once and signed. I signed next with a steadier hand. The ink felt heavier and right. The pilot opened with the smell of cardboard and cinnamon. "Priya Patel," said Green across nodes, tail latencies trimmed. Vans traced neighborhoods like clean handwriting. The merchant watched dashboards and grinned without asking for translation. Maya Bennett said, "Cycle, time down 32%, refund rate falling." Jenna Park said, "With consent, capture a 10-second quote." Daniel Bennett said, "I argued fear and lost, and I am glad." A bell rang above the door like a small anthem. New orders stacked softly and sang of repeat buyers. The room learned to breathe again, slow and deep. The invite to the innovation board hit like a drumline in our chests. Jenna Park said, 10 minutes, 3 proof points, 1 ask. The agenda seated us beside Victor Hargrove again. I felt clean fire, but no grudge. Maya Bennett said, "We win with proof, not scars." Priya Patel said, "Roots preload, failover rehearsed, nothing cute." Noah Green said, 1 page of facts, signed and dated. Marcus Allen said, "Lead round confirmed if the room nods." I packed the deck, a spare clicker, and a steadier spine. The door to tomorrow had a badge, a clock, and our name ready. The retailer's boardroom felt like a runway made of glass and verdicts, and every chair carried a vote. Victor Hargrove said, "We set the standard. Others imitate." His smile spread like cologne and asked for applause. I counted 3 breaths and let the tremor leave my hands. Maya Bennett said, "We serve the merchants you overlook." The chair studied me as if weighing a bridge. Priya Patel steadied the rig and checked a silent checklist. Jenna Park said, "Lead with outcomes, then mechanics, then cost." Marcus Allen adjusted his cuff and tracked the room's pulse. Noah Green said, "Facts first, claims second, sources named." The panel nodded in a slow, shared rhythm. I raised the clicker and felt the room tilt toward honesty. We opened with a courier icon leaving a dock and crossing the city like a steady pulse. Maya Bennett said, "Live routes, not slide routes, updated every heartbeat." Priya Patel said, "Latency under 400 milliseconds at the edge." A timer in the corner tracked truth without drama. Jenna Park said, "Cycle time down 30% across pilot sites." Receipts glowed like small flags in a patient wind. I said, "Picking and packing compressed to minutes, not hours." Noah Green said, data is third-party verified and time-stamped. The chair leaned forward and stopped, tapping his pen. Marcus Allen smiled without showing teeth. I felt the floor stop moving under us as the map breathed. Victor Hargrove rose into the gap with a smile that showed only edges. Victor Hargrove said, there are unresolved questions about their data provenance. The air felt cooler by a degree. I did not blink because blinking would concede tempo. Noah Green said, timeline on screen, sources independent, hashes verified. He advanced a slide that clicked like a lock on a safe. Priya Patel said, keys rotate weekly, no shared secrets, logs immutable. Jenna Park said, every claim matches a signed merchant attestation. Victor opened his hands as if catching rain that never came. I said, our house is glass by choice, not accident. The chair wrote a note and underlined it twice. The room exhaled through the vents. From the gallery, a familiar voice dragged yesterday into the room. Luke Harris said, that routing engine was my design. The panel turned as one, and the light found his face. Heat rose and cooled in my chest like steel in water. Jenna Park said, he left before the clean room rebuild. Noah Green said, authorship is documented by comet history and affidavits. Luke stared at the map as if it might lean his way. I said, the team who stood in the fire built what you see today. Priya Patel did not look up because the truth did not require theater. The chair said, please proceed. The present reclaimed the microphone and stayed. The chair closed his folder and looked at the numbers like a judge who found mercy in math. The chair said, we award the pilot to your platform under the proposed scope. The words landed like rain on a burned field. Victor Hargrove exhaled through his nose and adjusted a ring to recover the shape of control. Marcus Allen said, I will lead the round under the agreed terms. Jenna Park's shoulders lowered a fraction, and then squared again. Priya Patel said, locking the demo and exporting configs for rollout. Noah Green said, we will circulate the summary before close of business. I said, thank you for choosing outcomes over theater. The doors to tomorrow swung without squeaking, and we moved. The all-hands started with open spreadsheets and chairs pulled close like family. Maya Bennett said, we rebuild trust in public line by line. Jenna Park said, salary bands and review ladders published today. Priya Patel said, security rituals move from slideshow to muscle memory. Noah Green said, consent, retention, and redaction become daily verbs. Daniel Bennett said, people remember harm longer than help, so outwork the memory. I added a shadow board of ICs who veto bad habits before they root. Jenna said on call, rotation is humane and fairly paid. I said no heroes, no surprises, only systems that hold. The applause was smaller than hope and steadier than fear, and it felt like a start. The filing day moved with the rhythm of clocks, signatures, and breath. Noah Green said, we seek injunctive relief and damages, and we keep adjectives outside. Evelyn Shaw said, win with grace or the win owns you. I said facts, impacts, remedies, citations, no theater. Press pings hit like hail, and we answered once with a pinned URL. Jenna Park said, a living summary, versioned, signed, and time-stamped. Priya Patel said chain of custody verified and keys rotated. Victor's talking points fogged morning shows, and then thinned in daylight. Noah said, silence is not weakness, it is posture. I signed our statement and felt heat cool into clear light. We chose quiet proof over loud punches, and the room steadied. The pilot widened until the route map looked like a living nerve that learned by doing. Maya Bennett said, hold service levels during the spike, not after the apology. Priya Patel said, autoscale is armed, cache is warm, rollback rehearsed at 2 a.m. Marcus Allen said, funds release at close, keep burn honest and visible. Jenna Park said, credit the teams by name, and remove mine where theirs belongs. Merchants texted photos of lines shrinking and shelves breathing. Daniel Bennett said, I argued fear and lost, and I'm grateful I did. I said, promise tight, story quiet, outcomes visible. The metrics became habits and then expectations. And the horizon stopped running and nodded back. We turned scars into guardrails and invited anyone to borrow them. Maya Bennett said, our ethics roundtable begins with failures we own out loud. Evelyn Shaw said, principles that cost nothing are decorations, not anchors. Priya Patel open-sourced our checklists and labeled the warts. Jenna Park said, here is our post-mortem template, unpretty and useful. Noah Green said, values are verbs, and verbs take time you must budget. Hands rose with hard questions about payroll, privacy, and panic. I said, steal these pages and write stricter ones. A founder said, thank you for not polishing the edges. Pause came soft and real, and stayed longer than noise. Dawn found us on the roof that once held our doubts, and now held our breath. The city inhaled and painted steel with honey, instead of smoke. Jenna Park said, you did not break, you bent and chose where to stand. Priya Patel said, systems hold because people do, and because practice is love. Noah Green said, guard the truth while it is quiet, not only when it screams. Daniel Bennett laughed like someone lighter, and finally free of caution. Marcus Allen said, onward, with governance and grit, in that order forever. I faced the lens and let the wind decide my hair. Maya Bennett said, my best friend broke my company, so I built one I could trust. The silence sealed it, and then the day opened like a door we had earned.